Good morning, and welcome to the Contemporary Piyut, Global Networks of Middle Eastern and North African Music. To those of you who are here in person, I'm so glad we could provide you with a snowy Minnesota experience. And to those of you watching online, thank you for joining us virtually. My name is Natan Paradise, and I am the director of the Center for Jewish Studies. The center is hosting this symposium, and we are exceedingly grateful to our co-sponsors, the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, the Department of History, the School of Music, the Department of Cultural Studies and Comparative Literature, the Mediterranean Workshop, the Department of English, the Center for Pre-Modern Studies, the Department of Classical and Near Eastern Religions and Cultures, the Institute for Global Studies, and the Middle East Studies Collaborative. As you can see, there is broad interest in our subject today. We are also grateful for a generous grant from the University of Minnesota Emergent Fund. I'd also like to thank Professor Daniel Schrader, past director of the Center for Jewish Studies, for his support and initiative in making the symposium a reality. And finally, I want to give a special mention to our outreach coordinator, Marielle Coulter, who has worked tirelessly and with incredible dedication to manage the huge number of details that make an event like this happen. Marielle, we could not do this without you. Thank you so much. The Contemporary Piyut Symposium is conducted in full acknowledgement that the University of Minnesota is on Dakota land, within an area that is also the home of the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk peoples. And this acknowledgement is made in the awareness that while sitting on this land, gathering to learn about and celebrate the Piyut, a key expression of the yearnings and creative energies of the Jewish people as they navigated the challenges of maintaining identity and practice in a far-flung diaspora, and in the contemporary world, bridging, sometimes uneasily, diverse communities, cultures, and languages. As we gather for this symposium, it is appropriate to acknowledge the history of the indigenous peoples in America. I say this not to compare the situation of Jews today to that of Native Americans, still in the midst of a traumatic, ongoing experience of genocide, forcibly removed from their land, their language, and culture suppressed, their sacred sites plowed up, and their rituals made illegal in a genocide most Americans don't even acknowledge, but rather to recognize that integrity demands that we name the complicated position we inhabit. And so we acknowledge that the University of Minnesota stands on Minnesota Makoche, the homelands of the Dakota Oyate. And now I would like to turn the proceedings over to my colleague, Shir Alon, assistant professor in the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies and the presiding genius behind this symposium. Shir has worked with incredible imagination, and I think it fair to say heroic effort, to create an astonishing gathering of scholars and musicians. Shir, you have our gratitude and our admiration. Please join me in thanking Shir.
Thank you, everybody who braved it to get here, and everybody who is watching at home. I just want to say how excited I am. I feel like I got to organize a party and invite everybody that I want to talk to or everybody I admire or am interested in. And really the only reason I could do that and get to have all of you here is the tireless work of Marielle Coulter, that I want to thank again, Natan Paradise, and Daniel Schroeder. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our sponsors, of course, for making this fantasy possible and allowing it to grow and grow really beyond everything we expected and were hoping for. I want to thank everybody who made it, audiences and participants, to talk about what Piyutim are becoming today and what they can be, what kind of new creative and communal networks they already foster, and the kinds of social and political tensions and dynamics they bring to the surface when they circulate in new forums and medias. secular spaces, pop culture, virtual spaces, and so on, as they are continuously reinvented as they have been for thousands of years. What is particularly exciting about the next 2 days is that we have people here approaching the Piyut from several very different directions. We have cultural agents who have had incredible influence on the visibility and availability of Piyutim today, artists and writers who approach them as sources of creative inspiration or a launchpad for innovation and exploration, community leaders, musicians, of course, and practitioners, and of course scholars who study the Piyut as a historical archive, but mostly as a contemporary practice from a wide array of disciplines beyond ethnomusicology. And even though many, if not most, of the people participating here wear several of these hats, I think it is very unusual to have this concentrated groupthink and concentrated practice that we're going to have in the next 2 days. I also want to say that I'm very sorry that several people could not join us at the last minute, namely Gil Hochberg and Brian Roby. They sadly will not be here. Both of them were supposed to speak on the second panel today, and since they're not here, we will change the schedule a little bit. The first panel that is going to start right now will have 4 papers. We will have Galit Dardashti, Sam Turgeman-Thomas, Naomi Cohen-Zentner, and Ra'i Chagai presenting in the first panel, followed by a Q&A, and then we'll have a slightly longer break afterwards. So we want to thank everybody for their flexibility, which is the key word for today. And I want to invite the participants of the first panel and the chair, Sarah Gardner. Sarah is a PhD candidate here at UMN at the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and works on culinary heritage and cultural identity of Sephardic Jews in medieval Iberia. And she will introduce our first speakers. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Shir. And just echoing everybody's gratitude to you for coordinating this conference that has had many lives even before it has come to fruition today. So I'm really delighted to be here to present or to moderate our first panel of the day, Emergent Practices and Rituals. I'm going to give a brief introduction of all of our panelists, including our new and exciting 4th panelist, and then I will let each of our presenters present their papers. First up, we have Galit Dardashti, who will present her work, Arabic as Sacred, Emergent Piyut Practices Among Mizrahi Haredim in Israel. Anthropologist and vocalist/composer Dr. Galit Dardashti has earned a reputation as a trailblazing performer, educator, and advocate of Middle Eastern and North African Jewish culture. Dardashti's scholarly publications predominantly examine Israeli music and media and Mizrahi cultural politics in Israel and the US, and her current book project examines the Mizrahi Piyut movements in Israel. Dardashti has held postdoctoral fellowships at NYU and Rutgers and was assistant professor at JTS in Manhattan. She is currently visiting professor at NYU's Taub Center for Israel Studies. Welcome, Dr. Dardashti. I'm going to present everyone and then we'll, yes, yeah, thank you. Coming in from Zoom, we have Samuel Torchman-Thomas, who will be presenting Performing Gabriel, Reverberations, and Residences. Dr. Torchman-Thomas is a multi-instrumentalist, saxophone, oud, ney, vocalist, Hebrew, Arabic, Spanish, and founder and artistic director of Asefa and the New York Andalus Ensemble. He teaches ethnomusicology and Sephardic Jewish studies at City University of New York, and he is faculty member for both the Aleph and Academy of Jewish Religion cantorial programs. He is also the director of musical arts at the Sephardic Community Center. After Dr. Torchman-Thomas, we have Naomi Cohen-Zentner, who will present her paper, Piyut Trend 2.0, a few thoughts in the aftermath of the Piyut revival. Dr. Naomi Cohen-Zentner is an assistant professor in Bar-Ilan University's music department, and until recently, the head of the MA program in Jewish music at the Schechter College of Jewish Studies. She was a postdoctoral fellow at Hebrew University's Dat Hamakom Center, and in 2019 was a Polanski Fellow at the Oxford Seminar in Advanced Jewish Studies. Her research interests include historical ethnomusicology, sacred songs of the Ashkenazi domestic sphere, and the cross-fertilization of Ashkenazi and Sephardi liturgical traditions. Her latest article, Singing at the Sabbath Table, Zemirot as a Family History, is forthcoming in the Oxford Handbook of Jewish Music. And then last but certainly not least, we have our fourth panelist, Ray Haggai, anonymous, who will present his paper, his paper, yes. Anonymous Remains Toward a Relational Archive of Piyut. Ray Haggai is a PhD candidate in the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Cornell and a Global Racial Justice Graduate Fellow at Cornell's Einaudi Center for International Studies. His article, Mourners Are the Soundtrack of Life, Mourning Time, and Aesthetic Geographies of the South in a Mizrahi Singer's Anti-Biography, has been published in Comparative Studies of South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. He is also the co-author, along with Jonathan Boyarin, of the bibliographical essay Jewish Diaspora, published in Oxford Bibliographies in Jewish Studies. Welcome to all of our panelists, and Dr. Dardashti, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I just want to once again thank Shir Alon for such a daring endeavor making this happen. This is the last chapter in the book that some of you know I have been very slowly writing on the Mizrahi Piyut movement in Israel for many years. And I'm humbled to have so many distinguished colleagues, and I would love your feedback. My last short fieldwork stint in Israel was 2019, and I've not attempted to update this research since then. So I'll jump in. In August 2015, I entered Jerusalem's Hip Zappa Club in the old train station compound and eagerly awaited the performance of the famed singer Ziv Yecheskel. Religious men wearing the large black kippot of the Haredi world with jeans and t-shirts comprised the majority of those in attendance. A small group of Haredi men wearing black and white were accompanied by Haredi women with Sephardi-styled head coverings. There were also secular Israelis in attendance, and I heard Arabic spoken sporadically in the club. At last, Yecheskel entered the stage. He wore a blue suit, had a soul patch below his lower lip, and donned a black kippah. After an instrumental introduction, he began singing with an unusually rich tone to a rapt audience that seemed to relish his every note. At one point, an inebriated man with a large black kippah came on stage to kiss Yecheskel on the forehead and bring him liquor. Yecheskel spoke comfortably with the audience between songs, at one point telling us about a recent spell of laryngitis he had experienced, and thanking God that he had given him back his voice so that he could perform in Ir HaKodesh, the holy city of Jerusalem. By 2015, it was not uncommon for religious Mizrahi cantors to perform sacred songs or piyutim at concert halls and clubs in Israel's mainstream. What made Yecheskel's performance noteworthy, however, was that aside from the one piyut he sang in Hebrew, he performed the rest of his set in Arabic. Throughout my research on Mizrahi music practices over the past 15 years, I've heard second and third generation Mizrahim occasionally reference their studying of Arabic, their writing, their poetry, and their musical performances in Arabic as not only political acts, but also as quasi-religious experiences. As poet and filmmaker Sigalit Banai told me in an interview some years ago, quote, "When I began studying Arabic in my 20s, I was very secular, but immersing myself in Arabic felt like a holy act," end quote. Like Banai, other secular and Mesorti Mizrahi artists such as scholar-poet Almog Bahar, who's here today, Sami Shalom Shtitrit, and singer Zahava Ben, years earlier had made great pains to study Arabic and include it in their performances even when the majority of their audiences didn't understand or speak it. Yet, my understanding of the sacredness of Arabic reached new heights when I began hearing anecdotal stories from Mizrahi Haredi communities while conducting follow-up interviews and research for this book. Though my primary research has centered around the importance of Mizrahi piyutim in the Israeli mainstream, I began exploring whether new piyut performance practices extended to Mizrahi Haredi. what struck me most in examining recent piyut practices in the Mizrahi world was the way in which Arabic had begun in some cases to be preferred over Hebrew. Unlike years past, when Haredim Mizrahim revered the melodies of classic Arab songs but replaced the Arab lyrics with Hebrew piyutim, over the past decade, most paitanim, or professional performers of piyutim, now learn to perform each Abdel Wahab or Kulthum song in perfect Arabic before studying and singing the piece in its Hebrew poetic form. In some of these instances, these Haredim experienced the singing of these secular Arabic songs as equally sacred, and in some cases, more sacred than their Hebrew contrafacta. This paper explores how divergent shifts in Israeli Haredi power structures have contributed to recent embracement of Arabic among Mizrahi Haredim. As I will demonstrate, some have faced criticism for these practices. I will attempt to place such trends in cultural context and decipher their meaning, arguing that such practices represent the desire among Haredi Mizrahim, like secular and Mesorti Mizrahim, to embrace their dislocated Middle Eastern and North African cultural traditions. So when Mizrahi immigrants of the 1950s arrived in Israel, they found little non-Ashkenazi educational infrastructure in existence for those who desired a religious education. Instead, the vast majority of young Mizrahim ended up in Lithuanian yeshivot, set up specifically for Jews from the Islamic world. Many immigrant families accepted this Ashkenazi patronage in order to ensure the continuity of religious practice for their children, and because they were promised financial support and integration within Israeli society. By the 1970s, however, disparities between Mizrahi Haredim and Ashkenazim became clear. Mizrahim were not accepted at the most prestigious yeshivot. They were instead directed to the Sephardi yeshivot. Reinforcement of such segregation occurred via matchmaking and in terms of the neighborhoods in which Mizrahim lived. And now, a major source in empowering Mizrahi Haredim to reclaim the Middle Eastern and North African religiosity lost through the Israeli yeshiva system was Shas and its spiritual leader, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. As Sami Shalom Shitrit explains, Shas offered a discourse not formally heard from a Mizrahi movement, a scathing indictment of the Ashkenazi Zionist hegemony for severing Mizrahim from the path of Torah. Ovadia Yosef was the leader of what Israeli sociologist Nissim Leon refers to as the Sephardi Haredi Revolution. Shas began establishing Sephardi yeshivot that, though still modeled in the mold of the Ashkenazi yeshivot, began to correct what they viewed as the injustices of the Ashkenazi yeshiva leadership. This meant integrating Middle Eastern and North African Jewish practices. In 1992, Yosef led a successful campaign to break from Ashkenazi patronage, which resulted in increased power and significant funds for Shas's cultural, educational, and propaganda goals. This was a watershed historical moment for the return of piyutim to the Haredi Mizrahi community, as musician and paitan Roni Ishran explained to me. Quote, "Before Shas, there were no options for someone who wanted a yeshiva education other than attending Ashkenazi yeshivot. And there they destroyed their Mizrachiyut. No piyutim, no Sephardi prayers, no nothing. So a few Shasnikim established their own yeshivot, and then they had no reason to try to please Ashkenazim. Sephardi students in yeshivot stopped being ashamed of their music and their piyutim," end quote. Ovadia Yosef, an avid fan and champion of Arab classical music, was a powerful impetus for the renaissance of piyutim from the Middle East and North Africa in the Haredi world. He not only approved of cantors singing piyutim written to the tune of secular Arab love songs, but encouraged them to set new sacred Hebrew poems to these Arab songs and teach them at their newly established educational institutions. Mizrahi piyutim therefore grew in popularity among Mizrahi piyutim. Since most Jews living in the Arab world were highly integrated into the fabric of Arab culture, when a Jewish paitan composed a piyut to the tune of an Arab secular song, everyone in the Jewish community understood the musical reference. But With the immigration to Israel and dislocation from the Arab world, the younger generation of Mizrahi Haredi Jews learning these piyutim in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s only became familiar with these piyutim in Hebrew, with no knowledge of the songs in Arabic. Ovadia Yosef students speak of his adoration for the Arab world's greatest singers of the 20th century. Many students recall him frequently invoking their names in his religious classes. Yosef, according to one of his students, would say, quote, Abdel Wahab is ranked first in holiness, Rishon mehaktusha, Kulthum second in holiness. He would also describe these Arab stars in Kabbalistic terms as well. Yosef would say, quote, Abdul Wahab is from the world of Atzilut, and Kulthum is from the world of Yetzirah. As Roni Ishran explained to me, he would say this in the classes partly in jest, but nobody else would have said this. The chief Ashkenazi rabbi would never say, John Lennon is ranked first in holiness, or something like that. You get it? Unsurprisingly, most of those close to Ovadia Yosef shared his enthusiasm for Arab music. Moshe Chabusha, for example, served as Yosef's house cantor for over 30 years. Chabusha is largely considered the most gifted singer of Arabic music in Israel, and he's known for his ability to adapt Hebrew pairs to Arabic melodies regardless of the content of the original lyrics. Chabusha's full immersiveness in Arab culture and music has enabled his collaboration with Palestinians and Arabs throughout the Middle East, and his belief, at least in 2009, that Arab music could conquer all political and cultural disputes between Arabs and Jews. Almog wrote an amazing article in Haaretz in 2009 that discussed some of these opinions of his. Chabusha's optimism for peace via music was based in his interactions with Arabs themselves. He's frequently invited to perform with other Arabs in the US, Europe, Egypt, and many other parts of the Middle East that he told me about. Paitan greats such as Moshe Chabusha encouraged other Mizrahi Haredim to study Arab modes, and gradually more young students became interested in gaining a deeper knowledge of the piyutim. This subsequently led some of them to the original songs in Arabic. In the mid-90s, a few Mizrahi Haredim met with Ovadia Yosef and asked whether performing the songs in Arabic in addition to Hebrew was permissible. Yosef said no, and advised them to continue singing the religious poetic adaptations of these melodies in Hebrew. For the most part, Haredim acquiesced out of respect for Yosef. But as the years passed, more Haredim became interested in the Arabic origins of the piyutim. Some say that Yosef began to soften on prohibiting the practice of performing in Arabic, or at least look the other way a few years before his death. Following Yosef's death in 2013, however, Arabic performance practices among Mizrahi Haredim proliferated. I began hearing from informants about small shifts, such as Mizrahi Haredi children singing in Arabic at public performances or bar mitzvah parties. Similarly, others mentioned stories of Haredim performing Arabic pieces at celebrations marking the completion of studying a tractate of the Talmud. One person also recounted a Haredi event he attended in 2014, where several men sang together in Arabic. One interrupted and announced that the time for chanting the evening prayers had arrived. In response, one of the attendees remarked, "But what could be more holy than these pieces?" Similarly, the 10-piece Arab orchestra Firkat al-Noor, comprised primarily of former and present Shasnikim, performed for the first time in 2014. Many members in or close to the Haredi world informed me that these musicians would not have agreed to perform this music in Arabic if Ovadia Yosef had still been alive. When I asked some why so many Mizrahi Haredim chose to perform in Arabic instead of Hebrew, I was told that performing the pieces in the original Arabic is an indication of how original you are and how professional you are. Roni Ishran attributed these trends to the growing number of young Mizrahi Haredim who have become less religiously strict than their parents, who took on Haredism in Israel. In part, the performance of Arabic among these younger Mizrahi Haredim reflected a willingness to loosen the rules a bit. The Haredi sensation Ziv Yecheskel, whom I described at the opening of this piece, exemplifies this phenomenon. When I interviewed Yecheskel at his home on a moshav outside of Tel Aviv in 2019, He told me that he partially attributes his decision to begin performing in Arabic to a moderation in his religiosity following his divorce to his first wife in 2006. He began making headlines for his impressive Arabic singing in 2013. After being asked in the press in 2016 why he was singing in Arabic and whether he had political motivations, Yecheskel responded, quote, "My primary goal was to do what I love, and over time there are goals that are bigger than me, going back to the roots and demonstrating that Arabic is not a dirty word, because I am an Arab." Do you know how many Arabs were excited about a Jew calling himself an Arab? They told me, "You have koshered the term Arab." So I'm willing to sacrifice a few sacrifices on the altar of goals greater than me, end quote. As a Haredi Jew, referring to himself as an Arab Jew, a term mostly associated with Mizrahi leftist activists in Israel, Yecheskel received increased press coverage, becoming the darling of Haaretz, Israel's leftist newspaper. Sami Shalom Shitrit, a professor, scholar, and Mizrahi activist, poet, and filmmaker, wrote a Haaretz art editorial in 2016 referring to Yecheskel as, quote, his Messiah. And here's his quote from that article. "He is my Messiah not only because he is bearded and wears a black skull cap and not a knitted one, and not only because of his wonderful pronunciation of Hebrew and Arabic, and not only because of his perfect Arabic poetry, and not only because it crosses lines and breaks walls, also because all of these, of course, but mainly because he himself is the only hope I see for the beginning of a vision for this battered place." In Yecheskel, Shidrit saw a vision of what the Israeli state could be. If Yecheskel could wear a black kippah while singing in flawless Arabic, perhaps there was hope for other Shas Mizrahim to move closer to leftist Mizrahi moderation while simultaneously embracing their Mizrahi roots. Okay, I'm going to play a very, very short clip of Yecheskel performing in France with the Jerusalem Andalusian Orchestra. Was enthusiastic about Yecheskel's singing in Arabic, however. Some of the prominent Israeli paitanim whom I spoke disapproved of Yecheskel's performance practices. None other than Ovadia Yosef's cantor, the great Moshe Chabusha, represented this perspective when he spoke to me in 2015. Quote, "I don't like it that he goes to parties of Goyim and sings in Arabic. That doesn't go together with being a cantor. It's inappropriate. It's all love songs, awful. Sing about trees, the rocks. No, it's all about love. What is that? Goyim. So I prefer not to sing those songs. Although, if I'd sing at parties, then I'd have great success. And I see on YouTube that when I sing in Arabic, I sing at home. Sometimes I record, so I upload songs in Arabic, and people from Arab countries like it a lot. But I don't do parties in public. I don't do it. Overall, I don't sing in Arabic. I won't take a hall and make an evening and sing in Arabic, although I know it's good, but it's inappropriate. I don't think it's appropriate for what I do. I do avodat kodesh, holy work." So Chabusha's conflicted critique of Yecheskel is clearly visible here. Although Chabusha possesses a consummate love for Arabic classical songs, he knows the limits of what is permissible for himself. He himself has been on the receiving end of public attacks from those in the Haredi community for teaching and performing in secular settings not seen as appropriate. Though uploading videos of himself singing in Arabic on YouTube may be appropriate, performing these same songs in a hall is not. Similarly, other paitanim in the Haredi community criticize Yecheskel, mourning that some of the greatest singers are moving away from performing the piyutim in Hebrew. A well-known Moroccan paitan in Israel told me in 2016, quote, This generation thinks that Arabic is the holy language, and this is a shame. The Arabic song doesn't need you to sing it, end quote. This Paitan also argued that Yechezkel's primary motivation for performing in Arabic is the extra money he earns from performing for Palestinian Israelis in Israel and Arabs in the US and Europe. Yet, this same Paitan also acknowledged that today, he himself, like most Paitanim, learns every piyut in Arabic before learning the piece in Hebrew. His teachers, he explained, did not learn the piyutim in Arabic, and in many cases they had no idea where the piyut came from or who sang it. But today, he explained, quote, "You can't sing it in correct Hebrew unless you know the Arabic first. This is the new generation," end quote. Like Habusha, this Moroccan Paitan also acknowledged the necessity of singing in Arabic in certain contexts. As he explained, if I sing at a party, it's more appropriate for me to sing the songs in Arabic. So even a Mizrahi Haredi critic of the increased use of Arabic over Hebrew acknowledges, therefore, that the singing of Arabic has become crucial to his performance practices. Yechezkel's performance of Arabic has also received criticism from the academic world. In a 2019 article on the performance of Arabic in Israel, anthropologist Nadim Karkabi argues that because the Israeli government has in recent years increasingly supported Mizrahi attempts to connect with their Arab roots while simultaneously decreasing support for Palestinian cultural spaces, Yechezkel's failure to advocate for Palestinians as a privileged Jewish Israeli performing Arabic implicates him as part of the Zionist attempt to erase them from existence. By the time I interviewed Yechezkel in 2019, however, I discovered that he had decided to stop performing for the most part. He explained his reasons for his departure from the stage. The first related to his feeling that singing covers of classic Arab songs no longer felt like an artistic statement for him. How much longer can I be a museum of Kulthum, a museum of Abd al-Halim? What about what I have to say, what I want to say? His respite from performing offered him some time to contemplate his next artistic move. His larger rationale for his break from performing, however, was disillusionment from the goals he had hoped to achieve. Quote, "I had an objective, and on the way I discovered that I wasn't on the right path to achieve it. And that's what made me despair. My objective was to bring Jews and Arabs closer to one another. That wasn't the main objective. The main objective was ego, same as everyone else. This is what I do best, so I want to share it with you, so you know me, so you listen to me, come to my shows, buy tickets and clap and love me, just like any artist. But over time, it went in a different direction, and I began to develop a higher purpose for it, which was bringing Arabs and Jews closer. But when I realized that it wasn't right, that it doesn't help, it doesn't deal with the source of the issue, it's like taking a painkiller for a headache. It doesn't cure the source of it. It just lets you ignore its existence. More than that, sometimes it does the opposite. In extreme settings, it had the opposite effect, like they stole our land and now they are stealing our music, so they are thieves. It's a fact. They do it to our music too. They are taking over our identity. Of course, that comes from very specific, very radical groups, but it is said. Or, for example, something worse. The fact that Jews are singing our songs and not theirs indicates that they don't have their own music. So it makes them feel that only they possess authenticity, that they have something that we don't even have. You try to embrace the other person, but they interpret it as though you admit that you have nothing. So that woke me up in a very serious way." End quote. Cultural disputes as to who has the right to perform or claim ownership of Arab music or language are not new. While accusations leveled by Palestinians and Middle Eastern and North African Jews that they steal Arab culture and music have certainly increased since the establishment of Israel, such claims predate the Arab-Israeli conflict. Despite the critical role that Jews played in maintaining Middle Eastern and North African Jewish traditions as musicians in the Islamic world, when Jews utilized Arab melodies for religious piyutim in the 19th and early 20th century, Aleppo, for example, they were often mocked by non-Jewish Arabs as thieves. In devoting himself so diligently to studying classical Arab musical maqam style and singing, Yechezkel assumed that his command of Arab music would enable him to connect more deeply with Palestinians and others in the Arab world. While this certainly did occur in many cultural contexts, when it became clear to him that many in the Arab world viewed him as a cultural plunderer, he renounced his mission. Yechezkel continues to teach Arab music theory at a number of Sephardi yeshivot. When I interviewed him in 2019, though, he had just begun his acting debut performing the leading role of Farid al-Atrash in a play featuring Jewish and Palestinian Israelis. The show was heading for a tour in Israel and France. Yechezkel acknowledges that he helped to hasten the trend of Mizrahi Haredim performing in Arabic and imagines that such trends will likely continue, and I'm going to just conclude. In my earlier work, I analyzed ways in which music can play a role in obscuring the violence and ugly reality of the Israeli political scene, most notably in staged performances of coexistence between Palestinian and Jewish Israelis. Yet one should be wary of language ideologies that attempt to delegitimize Mizrahi Haredi attempts to perform in Arabic due to political alignment or lack thereof. While one cannot dispute the discrimination experienced by Palestinians, performing in Arabic is not a zero-sum game. And I suggest that performance practices represent the continuation of the Sephardi Haredi revolution begun by Yosef and others to rectify the documented de-Arabization of Mizrahi Haredim in Israel. Designating Yecheskel as an anomaly or as the Messiah for singing in Arabic as a Haredi Jew, therefore, fails to frame such performance practices in the context of this unique Mizrahi Haredi phenomenon. Despite the fact that Shas has historically chosen to spurn the efforts of non-religious Mizrahi movements in Israel, my research suggests that Haredim like Ziv Yecheskel and those singing in Arabic in less public places have much in common with non-Haredi Mizrahi activists. These Mizrahi Haredim do not see their Arabic performance practices as a break from the past. On the contrary, this koshering of Arabic represents an attempt to repair their dislocation from the language, religious practice, and music of their Mesorti parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents who spoke Arabic, listened to music in Arabic, and did not wear Eastern European shtetl garb. A few years ago, a friend and teacher with deep roots in the Mizrahi world shared a video clip with me of Ovadia Yosef some years before he passed away at the age of 93. A group of Shasnikim are singing a piyut in Hebrew to the tune of a classic Abdul Wahab song at Ovadia Yosef's house. When they finish the piyut, one of the men asks Yosef, "Rav, why didn't you join us in the song?" Yosef answers, "I don't know the words in Hebrew by heart. I only know it in Arabic." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dardashti, for that enlightening talk. Now we'll have Dr. Torjman Thomas join us from Zoom. I believe so, unless they're projecting. I think we're projecting the Zoom. Okay, we're switching. Okay.
So we'll see them.
Yeah, maybe.
While we get the technical, the IT stuff worked out. Good morning, everyone. I don't know if you guys can hear me and see me, but I'm certainly missing many of my new friends there in Minnesota that I made in March on my visit, and send my best regards from Brooklyn here, dialing in to University of Minnesota. It's a little warmer here than it is there, so I'll enjoy that. I'm looking for the hosting privileges so that I can project on the screen, because I don't think I have screen sharing privileges quite yet. Ah, yes, great. Thank you. Give me 1 second here, folks. All right. All right, how's that? Well, I see a big blue screen in the background. Oh, that's probably my blue screen, right? Naomi, you've got a nice view from Israel? Excellent. Good. Well, today I'm going to spend a little time with Ibn Gvirol, whom, of course, is super well known, and all of our esteemed gathering here have had a lot of time, I'm sure, with Ibn Gvirol in the past. So I'm going to take us on a little journey of what's happening with some of his works today. So in modern parlance, we could say that Ibn Gvirol is blowing up. In the internet age, this means gaining in popularity, going viral, attaining celebrity status. Today, I present a look at the past and the present to appreciate the impact of the work of this towering figure on cultivating Jewish diasporic identity and on inspiring the contemporary moment for piyut. Contemporary expressions of piyut find new and inventive homes in the hands of modern musicians and poets, the work of Shlomo ibn Gabirol is far-reaching, pervasive, and a touchstone for many serious practitioners. In his lifetime, glorified as part of the golden age of Sephardic poetry, serves as a temporal route for the Andalus, categorized, at times mythologized, at its best as typifying convivencia. Here we wallow in an imagined space of confessional coexistence, imbued with collaboration and intercultural exchange, asserting a sort of proto-cosmopolitanism that values ethnic plurality as a means for a sort of singularity of purpose. Andalus, Sepharad, is actualizing in moments of grace the ideals of Plato's vision for society, certainly that learned leaders are at the helm. High culture expressed in poetry, music, philosophy, theology, and more have their day or century in the popular consciousness of medieval Iberian society. Of course, all of those who scrutinize more closely, scratching an unsettled itches, find in the vestiges of this time the messy nature of what has been idealized, while some emphasize dystopian renderings of the period, perhaps to foster a counter-narrative to undermine the idealized golden age. Many find in the messiness not a degradation, but rather a necessary and even beautiful tension that encourages the spawning of new ideas, expressions, and contexts. Creativity needs a crucible. Here it is that we can locate Shlomo ibn Gabirol, the poet and philosopher, ruminating, stewing, chewing on the twists and turns of his life, and bedazzling humanity with a flash of the pen by producing a diwan of piyutim that would serve to enamor and inspire far and wide. 4 centuries after Gabirol's lifetime, after the scars of societal upheavals and degradations, after the scourge of ethnic cleansing would eviscerate and seek to stamp out the Andalusian ethos that celebrated its messy but vibrant cohabitation as a hallmark of humanity, the bodies were forced into exile, to wander and seek refuge in new environs. Sephardim would soon find themselves in somewhat familiar societies across the Maghreb and into the Levant. Like many texts, including the biblical, Talmudic, and liturgical, these piyutim spoke of a transnational communal identity. Gabirol's piyutim provided a meeting point. As a jewel in the crown of Sephardi heritage, his diwan had been circulating for centuries already, reverberating in Jewish spaces attuned to Adab al-Arabiya. The burgeoning Sephardi diaspora community insisted on finding more space for his works to be expressed. His works became staples of synagogue liturgy, especially for the Yamim Noraim, High Holy Days, paraliturgical contexts such as life cycle events, Shabbat tables, and the like, and in time as key pieces in Bakashot repertoires from the Maghreb to Bavel. Later, Ibn Gabirol would serve as an icon of early Jewish European Enlightenment thinkers, envisioning a modernity underpinned by a humanist renaissance. For the modern Zionist, Ibn Gabirol would be a Gibur Shel Ivriyut, a hero to inspire the new Hebraism, so crucial in cultivating national identity in an emergent modern state of Israel. In contemporary times, Ibn Gabirol stands amongst just a few of the Golden Age Paitanim of Sfarad, who are recognized and celebrated for their substantial contribution to a canon of historical figures that continue to inspire. From Tel Aviv residents whose psychogeography is affected on a daily basis according to his name, to the stage settings of a plethora of musical performances worldwide. From synagogues of every denomination yearning for devotional inspiration, to the lips of a young yeshiva bachur learning Masoret in a tiny corner of Brooklyn. From the fresh pens of today's poets and translators to the scholars seeking new angles of understanding. Ibn Gabirol's presence grows by the day. As I mentioned at the outset, he's blowing up, and I am certain we are yet to witness more in the coming hours of Ibn Gabirol, and certainly for years to come. So Ibn Gabirol, Shlomo ibn Gabirol, Abu Ayyub Suleiman bin Yahya bin Jabirol lived through a tumultuous time in Iberian history. The 11th century, factionalized city-states emerged as Taifa kingdoms, creating a new phase for Iberian Jewish communities. Navigating newly emergent fault lines of political power created strife and opportunity. Nevertheless, the Andalus of this century still relied upon certain structures beneficial to a poet's life and work, including the patronage system still intact, competing courts wielding the arts and sciences as a banner of cultural capital, and the relative freedom Jews enjoyed to express theological inclinations in their subaltern religious status, undisturbed by competing visions of Islamic thought and practice. For Ibn Gabirol, this proved fertile ground to sow the seeds of his brilliance. Yet, he was also perpetually disturbed by elements in his personal life. He seemed a committed curmudgeon, with a sharp wit and a tongue to match, sojourning in one Taifa state or another, oscillating between support and marginalization, physically unfit and in pain, seemingly in a constant competition with others and himself. As the title of Ray Scheinland's collection suggests, Ibn Gabirol was like a vulture in a cage. So we are all, sure, very familiar, many of us, with his biography, but that's just a bit of a gloss. And I would just note that this picture probably is not a great rendering based on a lot of what we have learned about him in terms of his physical appearance and his challenges. So, centering Andalus. Today's Andalusia is but a remnant of its former past. It has been relegated to but a southern province of modern Spain. For several centuries, the region's multicultural tapestry had been shredded and left in tatters, save for an influx of South Asian migrants, Gitano in common parlance, settling in and reinvigorating the countryside with a new breath. In ruminating on flamenco 100 years ago, 1922, the musical style most readily associated with Andalusia's contemporary popular culture, Garcia Lorca delivered a lecture on the Concurso del Cante Hundo. In his effort to elucidate the roots of flamenco's deep song tradition and to admonish the developments wrought on the genre by what he perceived as a creeping commercialization, Lorca points to several appreciable elements that make for a proper understanding of the tradition. One element is that Cante Hundo was rooted in the Andalus of the past, prior to the arrival of the Gitano, i.e. its Jewish and Moorish contributions ever present. And another, that in true Andalusi fashion, poetry and music always go together. These two ideas help animate engagement with the works of Ibn Gabirol. As a harbinger of Sephardi diaspora experience, his work reminds us of a Jewish homeland in Iberia and especially Jewish culture in that milieu. Indeed, he has inked a corpus of Andalusi blues poems. With his expressed Neoplatonist yearnings for the divine to release the soul from its prison, Ibn Gabirol provides a great vehicle for what Lorca would call the essential element of the Cante Hundo singing style, duende. Viva Dios, Ole, or Allah, Allah in the Tarab context, proclaimed by attuned listeners, serve as expressions of a, quote, communion with God through the five senses. Such is the purpose, for example, in the Bakashot. Here, individual and communal petitions are made using many an Ibn Gabirol texts. Moments of intensity are met with communal release, expressed by a singular resting tone at times. So many of Ibn Gabirol's poems are inherently musical, invested with rhythmic elements in the poetic meters, rhyming that can be best appreciated upon performance. Short qsaidot that may seem pithy, but when rendered with musical accompaniment, lead a full life. Now I turn our attention to Ibn Gabirol's work as a product of and for Jewish diasporic identity. Not long after his time, we have from the Cairo Geniza a 12th century letter that his reach was growing. Gotein suggests that this letter was sent to a scribe located in a small town in the Rif in the Maghreb. The writer asks for a copy of the Diwan of Shlomo HaKatan, Zichron Livracha, post haste. He also makes mention that he will share it with a local Hazan, reminding us that such work is meant to be seen and engaged with by the community's local musical specialist. We can substantiate from this evidence important facets of Gabirol's Diwan. One, that it is on the move, and like examples of rabbinic literature, Teshubot, Forim, and so forth, is being circulated through multiple locales of the Jewish diaspora. Number two, the poetry is meant to be performed with some sort of musical setting. Number three, that as the Diwan travels, it is subject to potential changes in the copyist process, resulting in multiple recensions. And number four, that the musical setting is ultimately unclear, but likely expressed using localized musical conventions. So, I'd like to turn our attention now to an exploration of several clips of recent settings for three different Ibn Gabirol poems: Sha'arecha, Sha'ar Pitah Dodi, and Shahar Avakeshcha. These are amongst the most well-known Ibn Gabirol piyutim. In our journey through these clips, we will see a range of ways that modern singers, musicians, and are engaging with these works. We will also see how these works can operate as a meeting place for expressing diaspora identity, and how in the creative space of music making we can perceive much about Jewish identity construction. As has been stated in many ways time and again, music serves as a vehicle for intercultural exchange. Intercultural exchange is a fundamental impulse in fostering diasporic identity, negotiating boundaries of individual and communal identity. Additionally, we will hear a few extensions of Ibn Gabirol in musical forays that imagine a world of associations with the poet. All in all, we're looking at a fertile landscape in this contemporary moment. Sha'arecha. Well, just a little bit about the piyut itself. He is in typical Ibn Gabirol style, a bit of a chutzpan, talking to the divine in a very pointed way, essentially demanding on behalf of the community to open up the gates of forgiveness. And so it's understood in that context, but not necessarily always finding itself in a repertoire of selichot. It's in the bakashot, it's in the selichot, even for some it's part of Shabbat. So we've seen it referred to in Shabbat morning repertoire or in Erev Shabbat repertoire. So I just have here a few contemporary performances. One is from one of my close contacts, Rabbi Gad Buskila, the leader of Netivot Yisrael Synagogue in Brooklyn. And he remembers it being part of the Saturday morning repertoire in Casablanca, in his father's Bet Knesset.
שעריך בדוב קיה פתחה ולדל שואל לפניך יסלחה לך תבוא תפילתי ושבעי מקום כבש ועיסרון ומנחה מאור עיניי רצה ושמור לשוני ואם אשגה לפניך יסלחה הרים אותי לך ליבי ועיני נטה אוזן וגם עין פקחה.
So, a more traditional kind of context. Now we'll turn our attention to a very different setting. This is the Piyut Ensemble. Yair Harel is there with us at the conference with Rabbi Chaim Luke, of course, one of the star transmitters of the tradition from Morocco to Israel. In this case, we have actually a setting that is built on some, or predicated on some tradition from Morocco, but also very mixed and sort of reinvented with some new instruments and some coming together of musical setting that is very different from what we just heard in the synagogue context. Unfortunately, for time, I'm going to have to be very short with my clips this morning. But that setting, just to note that there is, Rebbe Chaim Luke is actually doing some Arabic text, which is from the original song, that he's then also displaying the Hebrew text. This one is a very different setting now. We're getting a very studio arrangement now with pop jazz stylings, moving past repertory ensembles, if you will, and with modern functional harmony, yet mixed with a maksum rhythm in order to kind of ground it into a Mizrahi sound a little bit.
بدفكيا بطاخة ولدان شوئل لفانخ يا سلاحة شعارخا بدفكيا بطاخة ولدان شوئل لفانخ يا سلاحة
So interestingly, we have the same melody from the synagogue version from Rabbi Gad Buskila, but now with much different kind of trappings. Sha'arecha travels, and we have actually differences in the text itself, the piyut. So this is kind of an interesting moment, and we can look in again a couple examples from the Geniza where this piyut shows up and has some changes in wording, and also the second photo there shows even a marking at the end of each pasuk that it should be, or the end of each bait, I should say, that it should be the refrain, which implies some sort of performative instruction. And then we have a version that has been printed in a bakashot repertoire that is what I would call the long version. We do not see that version in the Geniza, so are these additional lines that are now styled in Ibn Gabirol, a modern poet, a poet after his time, extending. Then the bottom one here is actually the version that we see in the Karaite Sidur. And in the Karaite community, which actually skews closer to what we have in one of the Geniza documents, we see some more significant changes in the text. Let's take a quick listen of a couple of these. Manny Cohen, the Chazan in Israel.
شعارخ بدفكيا بطاحة ولدال شوئل لفانخ يا سلاحة لفانخ تبوتي في التي بشبعي מקום כבש ועיסרון ומנחה.
Here's another version that's more synagogue based in Tab Ush'ak, which is an Andalusi tab. Oh, sorry about that.
שעריך בדופקיה פתחה ולדל שואל לפניך יעשה לחר.
שעריך בדופקי הפתחה, ודש שואל לפניך יעשה לחר.
And finally, a Karaite version for Erev Shabbat.
שעריך בדופקי יפתחה, ואם מעטוף כשואל יד שלחה, לך תבוא תפילתי בשבעי, מקום כבש ויסרון למלחמה.
So, just moving on, because we are going to be a little short on time. Sha'ar Pitah Dodi, this is another very well-known piyut. Full disclaimer, this is the New York Andalus Ensemble, which I direct. And in this particular clip, one of the things here is that we're finding it in performance in New York, in this ensemble at least, in mixing the Hebrew and the Arabic as for the song, that much like Chaim Luke we heard in his version. However, here we also have a mixed participation of people engaging with the piyut who are not native Hebrew speakers. In fact, native Arabic speakers from North Africa performing the Hebrew and the Arabic, and people who have no connection either to the Hebrew or the Arabic, but are just into the music and have come to learn. The New York Andalus Ensemble works over the texts as part of the learning process as well, in order to get to the meaning of the texts that are sung, both in Arabic and Hebrew. Well-known setting for the Sha'ar Pitach Dodi. With that same melody in mind, here now we find that melody very much attached to this text and being rendered by Barry Socholov in a very different way, with a lot of progressive rock elements. Like Pink Floyd meets Sha'ar Pitach Dodi. And this is from his Ibn Gabirol album.
שער פתח דודי, קומה פתח שער, כי נבהלה נפשי, גם נסער הסער, לי לעגה שפחת, אמי ורם ליבה, יען שמוע אל, כל צעקת נער.
Very different setting, same melody, believe it or not. The next version here, though, kind of cuts somewhere in between. Lior Meleach, a traditionally trained Moroccan chazan, working with Misha Shitrit, and they do something somewhere in the middle here. The same melody again, as I should mention.
شعار فتح ضدي كما فتح شعار كني هلا نفشي قام سعر سعر للا عقاش بحار.
So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Shachar V'Keshcha, which is another very well-known piyut. We have a number of examples of folks connecting with this and bringing in all sorts of different ideas to it in a hotbed of Jerusalem. But I want to move forward to the Gebirol extensions, because these are some interesting ones where we actually have this piece, which is totally instrumental, so therefore is not really connecting to Gebirol poetry at all. Meditatio Alchimia, just to bring forth a vibe of Ibn Gebirol. We kind of know where that's going. That's on an album evoking some connections to Kabbalah. Then we have this, which is actually El Prisionero, which is an album, this is the song, but it's from an album that's all about Ibn Gebirol, but new poetry in Spanish and set in the flamenco cantejundo tradition.
Ay, ay, tran, 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 ay, tran. Triste lo dijo el mezquino.
So in this sense, Ibn Gebirol is inspiring some new poetry. Let's move forward here on my concluding thoughts. Most of the modern piyut movement remains centered in Israel, where for contemporary musicians there's a greater flexibility and functionality to create with texts that are part of the native language than in most sites of Jewish diasporic life. The status of Ibn Gebirol in the national imaginary remains important, beginning with early efforts to privilege Ivriut and the golden age of Sephardic Jewry as a prototypical touchstone for early modern Zionism. Movements like Kehilot Sharot and later Hazmanah Lepiyut have encouraged engagement and participation throughout Israeli society with the material. In the U.S., the context for piyut remain more limited as there is a persistently strong language barrier. In traditional Jewish and Hebrew-speaking communities in the U.S., there is stronger interest coinciding with religious affiliation and or proximal relationship with Israeli popular culture. While our focus in this presentation has been on the musical, for a few Ibn Gebirol piyutim, reiterating the sense that the Andalusi tradition meant for poetry and music to be linked, we must note that there have been important forays by modern English-speaking poets, including Peter Cole, who's here with us, Ray Scheinlin, even Bernard Lewis, to translate Ibn Gebirol's works to new audiences. Ibn Gebirol's work has found a new space to be heard as well in cyberspace, countless websites, social media, messaging groups. His work is reaching new audiences and deepening connections with many already familiar. And the ability to circulate musical settings and translations is creating new avenues for connection to his work. In conclusion, we can say that through Ibn Gebirol's piyutim, his spirit and perhaps the spirit of Sfarad continues to reverberate and resonate in new contexts, and that his piyutim remain a fertile playing field for the give and take of intercultural exchange that allows for Jewish identity in the diaspora to be renewed and to develop. Thank you.
Hello, it's my turn. We're just beginning like that with no further ado. Thank you very much. That was great, Samuel. I really enjoyed it. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, Naomi. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And can people in the audience hear me?
See a thumbs up. I see a thumbs up. Excellent.
Okay, wonderful. Okay,
Take it away.
thank you. Thank you. So I will just share my sound. And I want to just start by saying that I know it's not much fun to come to a live conference and then to listen to an online lecture, and I'm very sorry that I could not be there and attend in person. But according to my research, I've just saved 2.3 tons of carbon dioxide emissions by not flying to Minneapolis and back from Jerusalem. And so maybe this can be a small consolation for us, and I'm happy to share this mitzvah with you and with your patients. So thank you very much for your patience with me. Okay, So in 2020, a new song called Amen al Hayladim was released by Israeli pop singer Hanan Ben Ari. And although it had no direct appeal to God, it was clearly a song with prayer. So the lyrics are, I pray for my children that they shouldn't inherit my flaws, that they should embrace each other. Amen, that they should always remain healthy. So let's watch the way this song is performed in a live performance from June 2021. Just bear in mind that the security situation in June 21 was one of unrest, and there was a real fear of upcoming war. Sorry.
אמן, אמן, אמן על הילדים שלי, שלא ירשו את הסריטות שלי, רק תחבקו אחד את השני. אמן שתהיו בריאים תמיד.
I'm just going to try and make sure that you can watch the video as well. I'm coming back. There we go.
תגידו אמן על הילדים שלנו, שיהיו בריאים תמיד, שיהיו שמחים תמיד, שלא ישמעו עוד אזעקה אחת בחיים שלהם, שלא ידעו עוד מלחמה אחת בחיים שלהם, שאף אחד ואף אחת לא יפגע בהם, לא בגוף, לא בנפש, לא בכיתה ולא ברחוב, שיזכרו וידעו תמיד תמיד שאנחנו אוהבים אותם, גם כשאנחנו לא תמיד מראים את זה, וגם כשאין לנו סבלנות, אנחנו אוהבים אותם אין סוף, אין סוף, אין סוף. ונשאיר להם עוד אחד ביחד. מוכנים? אמן שתהיו בריאים תמיד.
Okay, let me just figure this back. Oh well. So in this performance, we hear echoes of prayer in the lyrics, which include a plea to see the children safe, and in the music, which also bears a certain resemblance to the liturgical recitation of the high holidays. But it's particular the singer's banter between songs, which creates a cathartic moment addressing parents' anxiety and apprehension within the context of the security situation. There are children should always feel safe, they should never have to feel missiles and bullying, etc. And the melody for this, there you go. The melody for the song, which was composed by Ben Ari, is reminiscent of the Ashkenazi musical mode of Tchina, the Tchina mode used in the high holidays. The melody has the same phrase structure and uses the same melodic anchors. If you think of אל תשליכני מלפניך ורוח קודשך אל תיקח ממנו, or compare with אני מתפלל לילדים שלי שלא ירשו את הסריטות שלי, שיחבקו אחד את השני, אמן שיהיו בריאים תמיד. So you hear there's something there which is quite similar. From the audience's perspective, we see a unified communal singing reminiscent of Shira B'Tzibur, which has been called the secular prayer because of its liturgical power and the solidarity that it engenders in the audience, especially during times of war and security unrest. On the other hand, see an animated audience singing all the words of the song, responding to a charismatic rock performer, as in any other rock concert. But something else is happening here. The response of the audience shouting Amen, stressing the second syllable of the word, Amen, is a customary response to a spontaneous blessing among Mizrahim, the Jews of Middle Eastern descent, which has become widespread practice for religious Jews in Israel. So by blessing all those present, Hanan Ben Ari, who has been called a mix between Shlomo Artzi, Bruce Springsteen, and Shlomo Carlebach, puts himself in the role of the spiritual leader and frames his audience as the congregation. He takes a calculated guess that they will have had similar experiences and will know how to respond to his blessing. And he's right, they have and they do, answering him with a communal amen, as is customary. With this, he has transformed the concert stage into a bima, a synagogue stand from which the cantor leads the prayer. The worship-like practice, construing the Caesarea amphitheater as a site of sacred work, is further highlighted by a short prayer, which Ben Ari regularly says in a group embrace with his musical team just before going on stage. L'shem yichud kudsha brichu. It's traditionally used before you perform a mitzvah, and while this takes place backstage, it is also broadcast on large video screens so that the audience is made aware that this prayer has been said before the performance. This practice frames a subsequent performance as a mitzvah, a holy commandment, something that Hanan Ben Ari feels is fulfilling his religious observance. Its deliberate public broadcast reveals his approach to the performance and his role in it to the audience awaiting him. Ben Ari is not the only singer to publicize the religious way in which he prepares to go on stage. Mediterranean pop musicians Sarit Haddad and Eyal Golan often post images and video clips on social media of themselves praying or saying the Shema Yisrael before going on stage for a concert performance. What led to this transformation, to the secular concert sphere turning into a site of sacred work and word ritual? And how does this phenomena tie into the theme of today's conference about the contemporary piyut? Today, I'd like to invite you to take a step back and view what was retroactively named the piyut trend in context. Taking a look at Israeli popular music in the aftermath of the piyut trend, which was at its peak about 10 years ago, and now I believe is really a thing of the past. I would like to point to three cultural phenomena in current-day Israeli music which were deeply affected by the piyut trend and can be seen as resulting from them in a certain way. They are, one, converting the pop concert arena to a sacred space, as we have just seen. Two, the writing of songs as prayers in Israeli popular music. And three, entire reenactment of liturgical events on stage. But first, let's start at the very beginning and ask what led to this. In 2004, November 29th, remember this date, it's an important date, an unusual concert took place in Tel Aviv's famous Heichal HaTarbut concert hall. Some of Israel's most well-known singers performed medieval Hebrew poetry to their own melodies. Ehud Banai, Beri Sacharov, Eti Ankari. They came together to perform new melodies set to the poetry of Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Geviro, which we talked about, Israel Najara, and others. All this under the auspices of producer Nitzan Zaira. The date, Kaftet November, the date of the UN General Assembly in 1947, was not chosen by chance. Musical director Asaf Talmudi said, "It was producer Nitzan Zaira's idea to make a kind of second declaration of independence. My interpretation of this is that if the original 29th of November was about reclaiming a geographical asset and building something new here, then Nitzan felt that an equivalent cultural declaration of independence had never taken place. In the realm of language, this did take place, but not in the musical language, and this event was meant to be the beginning of a So, between 2005 and 2015, one of the most popular trends in the Israeli mainstream was to compose new melodies to medieval sacred Hebrew poetry called piyutim, or to perform new arrangements of traditional melodies sung to piyutim. During this decade, many popular Israeli singers released an album dedicated to the mainly Sephardic piyutim. The piyut revival was seen by some as a kind of social amendment, since these poems and their melodies had been part of Jewish liturgical traditions of the Middle Eastern Jews for centuries, but they had not been present in Israeli popular music up to that point. This came at a time of change to the perceived religious aspect of traditional Judaism associated with Middle Eastern Jews, the soft religiosity perceived as atypical, distinctive both from Ashkenazi religious Judaism as well as from secular Israeli Hebrewism, has in the last few years become part and parcel of mainstream Israeliness. This further naturalized the common expressions of belief in God and religious spiritualities appearing in piyutim and in songs of the Mizrahi Mediterranean pop genre. The success of this trend lent heavily on Mizrahi Jews airing religious sentiments, which used to be a closeted element of their daily life and self-identification, together with a social shift in the Israeli public's attitude to religiosity and spirituality. The Piyut trend, whose lyrics were abundant with references to belief in God, a hope for redemption, and a fervent commitment to upholding the religious commandments, flourished in Israeli mainstream for about 15 years. Today, however, it remains relatively uncommon to hear pop songs consisting of new melodies set to the Jewish poetry of the Piyut. And when they do appear, it's generally within the confines of the religious popular music industry. Nonetheless, Israeli pop songs relating to exile and redemption, quoting liturgical and biblical verses, have since taken hold in contemporary Israeli music and not only by religious singers. In 2009, Eviatar Banai's song Abba and Shuli Ran's song Nekuda Tova were both released. These songs were written as personal prayers, utilizing poetic devices originating in the medieval Piyut and popularized by the Piyut trend, such as quotation, allusion, and paraphrase. Songs like these were abundant in the popular musical arena, and some of them continue till today. Writing from a vulnerable point of view, artists direct their songs at a hidden but present God, expressing thanksgiving and strong-held beliefs, and at the same time describing a lifelong search for God, including moments of doubt and anxiety. No longer merely quoting Piyutim, today's musicians have become paitanim themselves, using their songs to open a direct dialogue with God in a genre described as pop emuni, belief-based pop. The lyrics of the songs in this genre, which express a commitment to the Torah and include praise and supplication, stand in stark contrast to the shallow lyrics of the latest upbeat pop music in Israel and respond to this lack of meaningful content. Let's hear one of these songs. This one's a song called Abba. We'll just hear a little bit of it. You can see the translation.
אבא, אני רוצה לעמוד מולך, להאמין שאתה אבא טוב. אבא, אני צריך לדעת שאתה אוהב אותי, ככה סתם, אבא טוב.
So, I believe that the Piyut trends and its success instigated a certain shift in the entrenched paradigm that religious media was the only suitable arena for airing religious Jewish sentiments. And I believe that this spearheaded a transvaluation in the lyrical content of songs expressing a belief in God, an observance of the commandment, and a hope for redemption. Another byproduct of the predominance of songs about religious belief is the formation of the concert, where songs of faith are performed into a religious sphere. And we've seen that just before with Hanan Ben Ari. And so this becomes a site in which prayer and blessings are recited. So we'll see this emotion in action. In the song Modéani, singer Omer Adam, who doesn't present himself as religiously observant but does not perform on Shabbat, he paraphrased the words of the morning prayers, Modéani, and even quotes the melody used in the Sephardi Yerushalmi tradition for Kabbalat Shabbat. But let's see what Moshe Peretz and Omer Adam do before singing this song, which is famous for its religious content, while the rest of the concert does not have religious themes or songs. This concert took place in Jerusalem a few days before Rosh Hashanah. The timing is significant as these are the days anticipating the high holidays. And also the audience is a Jerusalemite audience. One can assume there's a higher percentage of religious and Masorti traditional participants. Let me just show you this properly.
אני רוצה לברך משה גם על המופע החדש וגם על הטליתות החדשות. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
לפני ראש השנה אני רוצה לומר לכם שעם הטלית הזאת, על הבמה הזאת, המהפכה האמיתית זה שכל אחד ידע שצריך להיות גאה, להיות יהודי בארץ ישראל. איך נהיה חזקים ונדע תמיד שיש אחד ששומר עלינו ואין עוד מלבדו.
מודה אני כל בוקר שהחזרת את נשמתי, מודה אני על בגד שהנחת.
Okay. So this location, this specific time of year, this song alluding to the morning prayers, all these invite these two Mediterranean pop singers to express the religious side of their identity, not only within the songs themselves, but between the songs where playful banter is usually expected. The text that he is saying is, the true revolution is that every person should know that they should be proud to be a Jew in the land of Israel. We should be strong, and we should always know that there is someone who looks over us. So I interviewed an audience member who attended this performance, and I tried to examine what it would feel like to be in this concert and how this is interpreted by religious people attending it. Is this a replacement for a prayer service? Does it have the same kind of sentiments? And so she said she attended this concert and she answered my questions as the following. It was in Jerusalem in Elul, but I would have been emotional even if it were elsewhere. I think they were moved because it took place in Jerusalem. And then when they chose to sing a song with religious connotation, it's even more moving. And the taking of the kippah out of his pocket and the whole ritual with the talit and the blessing and the shechianu, it felt like everyone was singing together, like a prayer, like a tefillah b'tzibur. And then she continues to say, when I went to Yishai Ribo, another religious singer, to Yishai Ribo's concert, the way people moved, she bows forward and backwards to show me it's not moving from side to side, it's moving like a prayer, na'nuah shel tefillah. It's shaking like in a disco and there's moving like in synagogue, but this was really moving like in prayer. The third and final ripple of influence that the Piyut trend had, in my opinion, is in the instigation of entire liturgical reenactments on stage. During the Piyut trend between 2005 and 2015, Piyutim were often performed in a mixed assortment with little to no notice paid to the context which it had originally been part of. A high holiday poem, a bakashot piyut, a zemer for Shabbat, they could all be performed consecutively and were curated at whim or according to aesthetic preferences. However, since 2016, and increasingly so in the current decade, concerts of stage events reenacting entire liturgical events from beginning to end are increasingly popular. When staging entire bakashot events on the popular stage or bringing the Yemenite Diwan to the concert hall, the authenticity is evoked by incorporating the original paitanim, their traditional dress, their original seating arrangement, and even an absence of musical instruments. All these are in stark contrast to the Piyut trend, whose whole essence was to stage the Piyut in a new context with new performance and cutting-edge musical arrangements, of course, with instruments. Let's see a little clip of this.
אל מסתתר בשפריר חביון השכל הנעלם מכל רעיון עילת העילות מוכתר
The entire performance is on YouTube, and I really highly recommend you watch it. It's part of a Bakashot festival where every night a different Bakashot tradition is reenacted in its entirety on stage. in a popular venue in the Zappa concert hall, which Galit mentioned earlier. So to conclude, the people instigating the piyut trend attempted to make the piyut accessible to all, to reshape and to contextualize it, and as such, they secularized their liturgical content. However, their endeavor actually made it acceptable and maybe even matter of fact to sound out musical markers of liturgical time and liturgical and lyrical content relating to Jewish belief, religious Jewish belief. And in this way, to transform the Israeli public sphere in the media, in pop concerts, on social media, into a religious one. In the aftermath of the piyut trend, citing a clearly religious reference or sentiment in song, which was not intended for the religiously identifying Jews, became almost nonchalant, especially when sung by Mizrahi Jews. Tapping into the nostalgic desire for familiar musical and religious experience, today musical producers stage entire piyut events like this one, which are reenacted in concert halls and clubs. For example, every summer, an annual week-long festival reenacting the Bakashot takes place in Jerusalem, reconstructing for 5 consecutive nights Moroccan, Turkish, Babylonian, and Urfali Bakashot. For musicians singing about their faith, the stage is not only a natural place to express their personal belief in God, it is also a place where the spiritual and religious expectations of their audience for peak experiences must be met. As a result, the role of the pop singer, the Israeli pop singer, has expanded to that of a spiritual leader. Through their own personal journeys of faith, they generate songs looking at the world through a viewpoint of faith and creating an outlet to express the religious aspect of the Masorti Mizrahi identity, which has become mainstream Israeli. Riding on the success of the piyut trend and the rising cultural capital of religious Judaism in today's society, all these serve as the ecology upon which the pop emuni now flourishes. The prayers and blessings of the singers in the song and in between them reinforce a faith in the audience, and for a few minutes the stage, with its video art and pyrotechnics, its amplifications and instrumentalists, becomes a site of spiritual work and is identified as such by all those present, something which could not have taken place without the piyut trend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen-Zentner, for that fascinating talk. Next up, we have Ray Haggai, who will present his paper, Anonymous Remains Toward a Relational Archive of Piyut. And we're switching modalities. Ray is here with us in person. And after his talk, we will have time for a Q&A session from both our Zoom and in-person participants. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for being here. I received the invitation for this conference about a year ago when I was in a particular juncture in my project. And this invitation and thinking again about piyut, which is something that I was doing in my earlier MA work, really generated new paths in this project that in a way I'm concluding these weeks. So thank you so much to Shir Alon for the invitation, and to everyone who is involved in putting this conference together. Son of Fragmentation. In footnote number 20 to his 1950 essay, A Document from the African Port IDAB, Shlomo Dov Goitein describes his attempt to decipher a word. The challenge is double. Not only does the Judeo-Arabic word Mowila seems to have ambiguous meaning, but its last letter or letters have faded or been completely erased from this Cairo Geniza document. The word possibly means wailing, crying, or in the Yemeni dialect, while she is taking care of a child. David Baneth, who worked with Goitein at the Hebrew University's School of Asian and African Studies, suggests a third possibility. The fading letters hide another word, Ma'awaldiha, which would mean with her son. Goitain concludes the footnote by accepting that in the manner in which court protocols found in the Cairo Geniza are often written, the last possibility seems most appropriate. Nevertheless, Goitain's account of his process reveals the wailing and care that are otherwise obscured by the factual and mute final interpretation. The case reported in this 12th century document involves an enslaved woman who was impregnated by her master, a Jewish trader from Fustat, Cairo, and who was driven out by him to a remote and foreign location a short time after giving birth. Uncovering the memory of another slave who appears ephemerally in the documents of the Cairo Geniza, Amitav Ghosh points to the unlikelihood that a 12th century slave would inscribe himself on historical records that would resurface several centuries later. If this initial mention of his name resounds so loudly 8 centuries later, Ghosh writes, it is surely because it has all the promise of the first murmur of rain in a plague of drought. Although her wailing resounds intensely, the enslaved woman in the report from IDAB doesn't appear by her name. What makes the resounding of the wailing possible is the fragmentation of the document, the layers of absence, of erasures, damages, and voids. The void evoked the expansion of speculated multi-layered meaning carried by this cluster of letters, retrieving the affective, audible, bodily, and relational aspects of the enslaved woman's condition in those moments. Damage is the sign under which the enslaved woman from IDAB reigns on our memory now. But is memory what fragmentation provides? This paper explores the simultaneity of fragmentation, sound, and namelessness, the wailing that reverberates along with the unraveling of the linguistic element of the name. These moments of sonofragmentation, I propose, are particularly relevant in consideration of the fraught production of historical representations of slavery in the Geniza, and in particular relevance to recuperation of piyutim from the Geniza, in particular relevance to the recuperation of piyutim from the Geniza, in consideration of power-laden historical representations of Jewish territoriality in Palestine. Sonority and fragmentation make the reformulation of these historical representations possible. The hierarchical relation between the subject and object of historical knowledge collapses as the wailing resonates with other sonic traces of displacement, with an engine of an old car that rattles a moment before Shabbat, disrupting the silence in the street of southeast Tel Aviv, and with an uncertain audible imaginary of ways in which piyutim were recited. A document from the African port IDAB marks a particularly early installment in Goitain's decades-long engagement in Cairo Geniza research. Already in this early work, the continuous historiographical prose represses the fragmentary state of the document as revealed only in a footnote. But a couple of decades later, when Goitain reproduces the document from IDAB in an English translation, the only trace that remains of footnote number 20 is the square brackets around the letters O and Y. In the desiccated report, you abandoned her together with her boy in Berbera. The disappearance of the footnote under the weight of historiographical prose reflects the factual approach that orients Goitain's relation to the materials of the Geniza. The fragments, rather than extending processes of speculative search for meaning, are framed by Goitain as constituting a retrievable archival source. The Geniza documents, Goitain writes, are mostly written in clear and factual fashion, so that even small fragment often contains complete and intelligible piece of information. Following Saidia Hartman, I approached the Geniza through sonorous and fragmentary aesthetic modes that formally reorder, or rather disorder, the pages of textual documents, further allowing the narrative track to be rerouted or broken by the sounds of memory, as noted by Hartman. These aesthetic modes enable me to consider the sonic elements speculated in footnote number 20, as well as the fragmentation produced by the displacement of the footnote on the page. Hartman's aesthetic attunement exhumes the life of enslaved women buried under the prose of legal documents, yet without performing a second order of violence, without imposing a hierarchical, chronological, and factual order on the fragmentary evidence encountered in the present, or forcing structures of meaning on past and present that evidently evade comprehension. The traditional practice of Gniza further involves a privileged relation to the dead, to guarantee that inscriptions of God's names are eternally protected from desecration. The Geniza chamber is periodically emptied and its sacred contents buried as though they were a body. To prepare the ground, so to speak, in what follows I resituate Goitein's essay, and in particular footnote number 20, away from the canonical intellectual history of the Geniza in relation to another, less linear and factually oriented genealogy of Geniza research. Paradoxical territories. Ella Shohat's notes on the Cairo Geniza open with an account of the displacement of the Geniza of the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo in 1896. The emptying of the Geniza by Jewish European scholars is rendered by her as a symbolic displacement in the realm of colonial knowledge production. Only symbolic as it anticipates a brutally concrete uprooting, that of Mizrahi Jews within the increasingly divided political geography of the Middle East. To challenge the dichotomous reduction of Mizrahi Jews to Jewish culture and territory, whose national borders are marked against an Arab Middle East, as well as the racialization of Mizrahi Jews within Israeli society, Shohat conceives a relational approach to identity. This approach situates Mizrahi Jews as part of decentralized global networks that connect East and South beyond colonial and nation-state divisions, global connectivities which resonate with the ones archived in the Cairo Geniza. Shohat's relational stance, it seems to me, is even deeper than stated in her own account. She draws on Gosh, who is in turn positioned as a new Mizrahi genealogy. Shohat's reading of Gosh makes apparent that the colonial displacement of the Geniza produces a break in its traditional conception, and since this break effectively operates as a progressive erasure of tradition, Gosh's decolonial narrative of the slave becomes the only source of transmission for Shohat's notes on the Geniza. The fragmentary image archived in the Geniza of movement and connectivity across a decentralized global space is retrieved by Gosh and deterritorializes colonial and post-colonial geopolitical formations, including regionalism, partition, and national territory. The imaginaries these shattered and kaleidoscopic pasts make possible that the images that these shattered and kaleidoscopic pasts make possible, nevertheless, refuse to be restricted to divisions of colonial spatiality. A deterritorialization that not only reimagines from within post-colonial geopolitics, but it enables to rethink the historical foundations of territoriality, arrives unexpectedly for an earlier layer of this broken and relational genealogy. Preceding in part Goitein's research and working in a particular period of nation building in Israel between the 1920s and 1960s, scholars attempted to produce strong claims for Jewish national identity based on the documents of the Geniza. Rather than accounts of global trade networks based on documents written in Judeo-Arabic, this included claims for a deep history of territorial presence in Palestine and of Hebrew as the national language of the Jewish people. However, the Jewish substance that these scholars attempted to capture through categories of identity, territory, and national language dissolved in their hands. Paradoxically, then, it is the nationalist phase of Cairo Geniza research that contributes most substantially to the critical possibility of relational memory, revealing the porosity of identities and spaces as they fail to be bounded by language. Scholars of the Schocken Institute for Hebrew Poetry, founded in Berlin in 1930 before relocating to Jerusalem in 1934, maintain in their writing a tension between a declared level of strong national claims and its simultaneous disintegration in their descriptions. Devoted to the study of piyut found in the Cairo Geniza, the Schocken Institute scholar emphasized the early periodization of this Hebrew poetry as well as indications of Palestine as a place where this poetry was composed. Menachem Zulai describes Yanai's poetry that preceded the Muslim conquest of Palestine, but rather than sovereign territorial presence, what situates this poetry specifically in Palestine is descriptions of a custom of wakes that gather to mourn the destroyed temple. Thus, while efforts are made to stabilize Hebrew as a territorial language, Zulai describes his encounter with the poetic content of the Geniza in terms of loss and dispersion, as thousands of anonymous remains. Chaim Shirman, a Schocken Institute affiliate, describes additional layers of fragmentation in Yanai's poetic material, touching on the fragmentation of the very figure of the autonomous author. Zulai understood the difficulty of the problem well, Shirman comments, but it seems as if at times Zulai was overly generous in relation to Yanai and Izrog. In addition to the difficulty of deciphering the fragmented copies of the poetry, the scribes of these copies attached together verses of poetry by various sources, so that distinct authors are impossible to identify. Merubeh parutz al haomed, there is more of the breach than of the stable, Shirman illustrates in a possible allusion to the destroyed structure of the temple. Moreover, the signature of Yanai's name, or that of any other poet, is missing. Zulai's demarcation of the fragmentary substance as a corpus of an individual poet, I suggest, is rooted in the desire to historically and geographically situate Yanai as a primordial Hebrew poet. The dissolution of the autonomous author undermines these claims, or at any rate weakens its rhetorical standing. Shirman's reflection on the poetry ascribed to Yanai, and particularly on the sound of its reading, dissolves not only the autonomous consciousness of the author, but also that of the listener. This sound unravels more fundamentally the boundaries of linguistic figures as mediators of defined meanings, not to mention of rooted territories. Here Shirman sets forth a line of disclaimers, noting that we know nothing about the melodies that accompanied these poems in Yanai's time, and that the pronunciation of Hebrew was different. Now we must indulge the sound of words alone, Shirman writes. But the absence of a tangible sense of how Yanai's piyutim sounded only amplifies Shirman's auditory imagination. The sound of the words alone is so intense, azu kol kach, that they themselves must have exceeded any possible melody. The audible quality Sherman identifies takes us to the outermost edge of the aggregation of sounds, קצה הגבול של גיבוב הסילים, as identical syllables are pronounced in continuous repetition and the meaning of words is overshadowed. In fragmentation as through pronunciation, the disruption of the signifying ability of the word dismantles its objectifying power, further unraveling putative territorial expressions extracted from the Geniza. Words, in turn, are lost in an abyss of endless and unknown possibilities of meaning. But in addition to a wailing that Goitan recovers from a damage in a text, mourning the loss of language itself, does anything else resound against muteness? Reverse. In the seconds that open his 2005 video work Reverse, artist Eliyahu Fatal is seen throwing an unidentified object into the Geniza chamber of a synagogue in Neve Eliezer, a neighborhood in southeast Tel Aviv. Fatal then enters his old car. The camera is installed on the rear view window, capturing the iron Geniza chamber from a growing distance as Fatal's car moves further away. Fatal is driving in reverse while the dark, gray landscape of the neighborhood unfolds against the back window pane. The engine hums hard on sharp turns and street corners. It's a sound of swallowing. It sounds as if the engine is turning in the opposite side, Fatal reflected in a conversation. And if an engine has a sound of ejecting fire, then reverse has the sound of swallowing. It's a materialization of the act of Geniza. It's not forgetting, but swallowing, an object that swallows another object, he says. The film ends upon Fatal's arrival at the art gallery located in the neighborhood's community center. As the car stops, on the rear view window, another iron sculpture by Yigal Tomarkin, a renowned artist in the Israeli art field, comes into view. The synagogue and Geniza chamber are left behind in these minutes of driving in reverse, but nevertheless remain present by way of reverse itself, disrupting the progressive movement toward a glimpse of Israeli canonical art. In the broken genealogy of Cairo Geniza research uncovered above, I reproduce Fatal's movement through the streets of Neve Eliezer. The reverse is reflected in the temporal direction that moves backward, as well as in the discontinuous movement that takes its very shape through ruptures. Simultaneously, the canonical edges of Geniza intellectual histories are reflected back in the space of Neve Eliezer. It is intriguing how strong Yanai's sense of exile and dispersion was, even though he lived, according to all signs, in the land of Israel. Sherman writes after noting that body, rather than space, is the essential metaphor for the people of Israel in Yanai's poetics. Thus, across multiple ruptures, Shohat's post-colonial notes on the displacement of Mizrahi Jews to and in the land are reinforced by the unintentional operation of language in nationally oriented Geniza research, unraveling images of sovereign territoriality and subjectivity. Fatal's reverse movement through the neighborhood resonates, moreover, with footnote number 20. Like a lacuna in a document, reverse somehow represents the void that extends beyond the limits of memory and knowing. Geniza is not forgetting, Fatal says, situating Geniza beyond the realm of human memory, individual or collective. Geniza is rather an object that swallows another object, but more than that, it's an engine an energy that operates outside the realm of human consciousness, drawing the objects of the present to be lost and kept in an eternal past. The buried content of Gniza, it seems, is infused into the space of the neighborhood. The fragmentary substance of the past can be sensed beyond the concrete condition of the surface, disrupting the presumed homogeneity of time-space. The wailing voice of the enslaved woman from the IDAB document would have remained unexhumed if not for its resonance with that fragmentary substance, if not for its resounding in a void, in an abyss of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray. I'm actually going to invite all of our in-person panelists and our Zoom panelists who are up above with us to come up for a question and answer session. If you have a question, folks who are here with us in the audience, Shir will come around to you with a microphone. Natan will be reading our questions from our virtual audience for our panelists as well. So please, your questions.
Thanks a lot for an exciting panel. And my question will be to the first panelist, to Galit, and about the question of Hebrew and Arabic and the reversal between them that was shown in your talk. And you spoke about Arabic as a holy language, and you spoke about koshering Arabic, right? And in a sense, we might think of the reversal in the relationship between Hebrew and Arabic today to what was common before, connected to the fact that today most of the audience in inner Jewish Israeli concerts of this music don't know Arabic. So what was a problem with love songs that were replaced by holy songs and the melody was left? Now the words are not such a problem. They are not well understood. Now, in the relationship, also the feeling of which language is the new or the modern and which language is old or a language of memory. And it was clear in the diaspora that the Hebrew was the old language carrying the memory. But now, in an inner Jewish Israeli situation, the Arabic is the one resonating, something from far away, a memory. We're adding to that, like the mysterious part of language, the fact that not understanding a language is sometimes not a disadvantage, but an advantage in making it a holy language, right? When Hebrew was understood by 10% of the community, and it was something very learned, but also something mysterious, right? So now the Arabic can perform in that sense. So maybe like trying to understand, and even in the sense of the accent, like which one is keeping the accent and which is secularized, right? So this reversal you talked about can be very much understood on those terms.
Yes, so helpful. I don't really think I need to respond to it. I think that there are really, really helpful comments that I will try to integrate. Thank you so much.
Any other questions from the audience? Please.
Could you please spell your last name for us? We didn't see it on the screen.
It's Haggai, Hagay.
Yeah, and I ask you to just ask your questions on the mic, otherwise the people on Zoom can't hear you.
Hi, thank you everyone. It was very interesting and open-minded. And I wanted to ask Nomi, can you please elaborate maybe, or did you consider the idea of nationalism and national politics in the action of Piyutim and the modern Piyutim or the Israelite Piyutim, and the way it took religious element, integrated them into nationalism or sometimes ultra-nationalism into the mainstream, and so yeah, that's the question pretty much.
Thank you. That's a very good question, because we know that music is kind of a soft way to talk about things which are difficult to touch upon. And so in a way, when you speak of a religious song, when you speak of a belief in God, it can also be used as a way to speak about an us versus them, as far as a sort of emuni, a sort of belief-based division, which is a religious one, when it's not politically correct or acceptable or possible to talk about an us versus them outside of the realm without getting into lots of trouble. And so in a way, using these songs of belief, which are clearly Jewish belief, it's not a general monotheistic belief, has been used. If you think of Misha Ma'amin Lo Mefached as part of Beitar Yerushalayim's football anthems, which clearly have nationalistic and, as you say, ultra-nationalistic tones about them. I think that the line is, there is a line, and it's a clear line, but it can also be blurred. And this kind of songs of belief, of reinforcing Jewish religiosity, also can be used to put up these clear divisions between an us, which we all know who we are when we sing about us. God looks up, down on us, versus a them, without specifically stating it clearly, because that's what the lyrical language enables us to do, and that's what music enables these ideas to be sort of put out there in a sort of a soft way. But I definitely hear what you're saying.
Thank you. Other audience questions?
Thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed and learned a lot from all of your papers. I'll ask a couple of questions to Re'i. I've heard this already and read it, but now in hearing it, I was just reflecting a lot about the difference and similarities between Gniza and archives as we know them today, like in particular state archives, where there's always these dynamics of simultaneous preservation and erasure, right? The project of national archiving is always embedded in, who exactly gets to be preserved and who is forgotten. And in Gniza, there seem to be different things happening, especially in the way that you're narrating it. The swallowing instead of the forgetting, the burial instead of the preservation. So I guess I would just like to hear you talk a little bit more about the relationship between state archives and Gniza and how you kind of perceive of it. Then my other question to you has to do with your use of Saidia Hartman and sonofragmentation, right? So she also uses like auditory potentials in her speculative history writing. And she does it in particular to write like an earlier history of Black feminism and Black feminist thought. And you were talking about this enslaved woman and the wailing that comes through. So I guess I wonder what you can tell us kind of about the political potential of rereading this enslaved woman through sonofragmentation.
Thank you. I appreciate both questions. So I'll start with the first, I think. So there's something in the Gniza which is a non-archive in a way. Sometimes it's referred to as an unintentional accumulation of papers, of unused papers. Although I tend to think of it otherwise, because I am interested in the intentional aspect that is at work there with how Gniza, I mean, there is sort of an epistemological process there that in order to preserve something, you are losing it. And the preservation and loss sort of, I mean, are indistinguishable here. And there's something interesting in the particular kind of experience that this combination produces that takes us beyond thinking of the Gniza as something that is unintentional. And comparing it to other practices of archiving, particularly ones that like nation archives that involve that are political projects, that are projects of political memory, that there's an aspect of power that is at work here. So there's something about the Gniza that is, for me, the way I'm working with it here, that is stronger, that all these earthly political structures and so this particular, if to talk about it more specifically in relation to this particular document and Goitein's writing on this particular document, so there are many layers of erasure, of absence, and many layers of voids in this document. Some of them are intentional. So Goitein notes that this document was disposed in the Gniza is in an unfinished form. It was unsigned by the witnesses who often signed their names on legal documents, and it wasn't sent back. So this situation happens in IDAB, away from the home location of Fustat. So this document wasn't sent back to Fustat, where it would be archived by the Jewish court there. So there are these intentional erasures in this document, and there are also the damages and voids that are the product of the slow fragmentation of document in the Gniza, and in a way dealing with Gniza and attending to the fragmentary condition of the documents is stronger than all these various erasures, various intentional and unintentional attempts to shape and design memory. And to the second question, so what I'm trying to do with bringing Saidia Hartman here and this idea of fragmentation in text that happens simultaneously with all kinds of sonorous presences, is to challenge the historicist. So Goitein has this historicist claim that slavery, as reflected in the Cairo Gniza documents, is distinct from transatlantic slavery. And it's very important for him and also for more recent Gniza historian to make this distinction. And for Goitein, I mean, this distinction is important also because he imagines the Gniza society as a reflection of westernized or Western progressive Jewish society. So this attempt to portray this society in ethical terms is also expressed in this distinction that he makes between these two slaveries. What I'm trying to do is to try and challenge this distinction, more because I'm interested in challenging the factual rhetoric of this distinction, in terms of thinking of a more serious attempt to think of or to compare between these two histories of slavery. This would require more work that is beyond, which I'm interested in doing, but it's beyond my current scope. Yeah, I mean, understanding how the particular mechanism of difference that is at work in medieval slavery in a Jewish society, and comparing it to race, to the modern term of race. I mean, this is another question which I hope to explore in sometime. Yeah.
Thank you all for these really interesting papers. I have a question for Galit. I was thinking about the pronouncement of who is holiest in Arabic music, Abd al-Wahhab and Kulthum, and thinking about that these are not just Arabic singers, but they're Arabic singers of a particular generation. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if first of all, if any of these Haredim are singing contemporary, songs from contemporary Arab musicians, and if not, what is the significance of singing music from, this particular era?
Yeah, that is such an excellent question. I don't fully know the answer, is the truth. Mostly what I know of is mostly people singing of this very specific period. Farid al-Atrash, Kulthum. Yeah. I don't know exactly what it means. I could conjecture. And I would actually love to think about it some more. But I mean, these are, this was the great period of Arab music. I mean, there's no question about that. This was kind of the height of Arab music, according to almost anybody that you ask. And so I just don't think there has been anybody that has reached those heights other than these really large figures. And it also, of course, it wouldn't be a stretch to suggest that these are the people who were kind of big when the parents and grandparents and et cetera. This is back in the day when when there were Jews living in the Arab world. And so it harkens to a nostalgic time where they could really claim that they have roots and that actually it's their music, right? So I've never particularly asked that question, and I think it would be worth asking. But I'm guessing that would likely that laying claim to this music is easier since those are the periods where there were, many, many Jews still living in the Arab world.
There's a question up here.
Just a short comment on Alexander's excellent and interesting question. I'm just thinking about this notion of what the repertoire of Arab music that is performed, and I think maybe we can think about the Haredi community or all of the Jewish Mizrahi community in Israel as the diaspora communities, and diaspora communities tends to be isolated. They tend to be conservative in taste, and they preserve usually music that was popular many, many years ago. So in some ways, it makes perfect sense that Abdel Wahab and Kulthum and all of those people who are no longer perhaps the most popular of younger generation would be consumed also by younger people in diaspora communities. And we see that in Arab music in the United States and in Europe as well.
Thank you.
Any other audience questions? If not, I actually have a question for Dr. Torchman Thomas. Oh, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you also. I want to follow up on the last two questions, Galit, and make your life more difficult even.
No, I love it. Thank you so much.
So there are two issues here that I think should be addressed regarding the subject that you're talking about. One of them is, I would call that the issue of supranational or transnational aesthetic sensibilities, that perhaps we are catching this repertoire within a certain, as you put it, framework of nostalgia, and I would say denying it the fact that it was not only an integral part of the Jewish Arab existence, but it was also an integral part of the immigration and displacement and uprooting in Israel, even through, for example, the consumption of Egyptian films, even those that were broadcasted in the Israeli television. And as we know today, or all of those who remember the films, that were widely consumed.
Absolutely.
Also, the repertoire was being consumed, and this is my second point, not to dehistoricize the phenomenon, because it was still consumed by members of the different communities, Syrian Jewish community, Iraqi Jewish community, even the Moroccan Jewish community, simply because that again, was part of the commonwealth, aesthetic commonwealth, dominant in the Arab world through the Egyptian music industry. So that's one issue of dehistoricizing it, that simply we live in a period, and sometimes when they hear all the papers, it's like civilization started in the year 2000. What started really in the past couple of decades is the intensification of the public knowledge about this phenomenon that was embedded within the communities before that without a lot of visibility. So now we have much more visibility, much more public discourse, social networks, etc., that intensify tremendously this phenomenon that was all the time existing. And to end, it had a continuity over hundreds of years. That is to say, even if you take the beginning of the 20th century, where most Jewish paitanim, whether in Syria or in Morocco, were very much on top of the very last trends. You know, we have piyutim based on Sayyid Darwish. So that was in the 1920s, and the phenomenon existed and was very much alive, and people knew many of the songs through different venues, except that it was just concealed from the public eye. It was very internal, very intimate, if you want, type of performances within the family. I mean, I remember from fieldwork, you know, attending events where people used to sing in Arabic in intimate spaces, and
Yeah.
what we have now is simply modern politics or contemporary politics of identity at place. And knowing also these figures that you were talking about, I think that there is also a space to consider, how should I say, to put it mildly, artistic aspirations, competition for resources that are legitimate, between different artists proposing different types of performances, like Tzvi Yechezkeli that you mentioned. And the opposition of Moshe Chavusha, in a way, it has to do also with a certain tensions of competition between artists, and not so much about high stakes of ideologies or of theology of music, if you want to put it in a more interesting way. So,
no question.
Yeah, the situation is very nazil, how do you say, fluid. Okay, very, changing, but to be aware of the historical continuities and discontinuities about remembering and forgetting and the dialectics between remembering and forgetting. But thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you all.
And I just want to respond, and thank you for all of that, Edwin. I want to say that even my grandfather in Iran was a big fan of Kulthum. Okay, and this is, he was that, and he was singing Persian music, and YouTube completely changed, everything. So in terms of the way in which people could easily have access to this material, the internet, and so being able to access music that they maybe heard their grandparents singing, or that was just in the communities, but now they could watch the whole video. It just changed everything. Thank you so much.
Any other
questions?
questions?
Can I chime in on just two quick things that might be thoughtful? One is that Ovadia Yosef, he made a heter in relation to Kol Isha, that it was okay to listen to Kulthum on recordings.
Yep.
Which certainly gave some leverage to that. And the other was that in the Brooklyn community, which I know is not really the focus of your work, but with the number of Israelis here in Brooklyn, it's interesting, like kids here in the yeshivot are actually super familiar with Kulthum and Abdul Wahab, almost like at the level that they are with regular other popular artists. And so that's a very interesting phenomenon that I've witnessed personally.
Yeah, I'll very quickly, thank you, Sam. I'll very quickly respond to that and say that it's so interesting to me that for sure so much has to do with the way in which today Israel informs so much. It used to be kind of in the other direction, that Israel looked to the United States for so many things, and now I would say that the United States Jewish communities are so influenced by trends in Israel, and that's not just in the religious communities, but also in the secular world as well. So thank you.
I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for their enlightening presentations. And I will pass the mic over to Shir.
I just want to say a couple of things. Thank you so much, everybody. I have so many more questions, but I'll keep them for the break because we need a break. We'll be back at 2:15 for the next panel. And I hope that, Sam, that you can join us as well, even though it's going to be very, very late for you. Yeah, I think that's it. So I will see all of you soon. There's going to be lunch for participants in the next room.
Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.
The lunch is being set out in the attic.
Thank you. Thank you, Shir. All the best.
Thank you, Shir. I don't know. I can hear you though, Naomi. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful to see you.
Thanks.
Bye, Shir. Good to see you. I see you waving.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.